I'm Helen Van Wyk, and welcome again to my studio. Yes, another three. Hue, tone, and intensity are the factors of color, and if we become very acquainted with them, we'll be able to mix color much better. Let me show you this painting I did. Would you believe that it is really made of only one color? The color orange. It has an orangish kind of background, has an orange picture, and orange onions, and an orange table. I'd like to show you, by doing another painting similar to it, how to recognize hue, tone, and intensity. So let me take this down and paint a picture for you. Again, notice how I have it pre-paired. Always think ahead in painting. It's such a complicated, painting really is easy. Painting well is impossible. So in order to paint halfway decently, you really should give yourself the edge and try to do some things to make it as painless as possible. So I always have a lot of brushes. I always have a great big jar of turpentine here to slosh my brush around. And before I start having you meet these three guys, hue, tone, and intensity, let me establish the composition, meaning where I'm going to put these, this arrangement. Well, an onion here, the onion here. See, don't suffer. Why draw it? Just place it. Know where you're going. Now that's an easy thing to do, really. And then you can add to it another decision, the shape and how it's arranged in relation to the rest of the objects. I move this into the picture so that if you looked at that, your eye would go to here. I wouldn't have that little thing shooting out of the picture. We are attracted to little things that have a directions suggestion. And the analyzation of this little copper pot that I've had for years and years, got it in Paris in 1948, is that it has a fat bottom and it's kind of flat-chested and it has a top. So I always feel that these objects have personalities. Sometimes I see them a little differently than I've seen them before. That's why I can use the same object over and over again and never be bored. And then I cut that just to make a variety. Yes, the painting that I showed you had onion skins, but I'll tell you, onion skins are so delicate, I'd hardly attempt them in the short time that we have to visit. I have all to do to tell you about hue, tone, and intensity. Now, the hue of a color is which way the color tends, meaning orange can be either yellowish or reddish. And so I look at this copper pot and say, yes, it's orange, but it's not yellowish, it's quite reddish. So I look at my palette and I see my options. I have this orange and this red, I have this orange and this red, and I have this dark orange over here and this murky red. And so my mixture is going to be started out with one of those. But then I have the other personality of color, and that is intensity. That means how bright or dull. Now this copper pot is not the color of a tangerine or a navel orange or the color we think of as orange, like the orange marigolds in our garden. It's a duller orange, so that rules out these two. And I look at these, and it doesn't even look like that. But this one down here, burnt sienna, if I pull that over on my palette, it's an orange and it's dull. So it might be the beginning of that copper pot. So I try it out. Always try a color out and then make your judgments, because, as I said, you can only get it right if you get it wrong first. And surely you, who are watching this demonstration, can help me paint it. What do I have to do to that color to make it look more like the copper? I think I have to lighten it, and you do too, I bet. And so I'm going to put some white in it and try it out. And now it doesn't look quite red enough. So I'm going to add a red, any red. Aha, that's good. Aren't you glad? So now I'm going to mass it in this general overall orange color that is medium tone, dull in intensity. I used to paint everything kind of fat. That was one way of making me thin. I don't have to do that as much anymore. Now, the onions are also in the orange family. But what's the difference between this orange and onion orange? I think, in comparison, the onion orange looks yellower than this kind. So it's a difference of hue. So out of this, might as well take it out of here so they'll like each other here if they join together here first. So I'm going to put more yellow in that and see if, well, look at that. Maybe that looks close enough. Basically. It's always good to start from one general overall basic value. Don't try to do it all at once. Whoops, too light. I thought I'd put a little white with that and I missed it. That had it better before. I'm looking for just tone, light or dark, intensity, bright or dull, or hue of orange. Hue meaning how it tips toward red or toward yellow. Now, the white of the onion is negotiable. Well, since it's going to be in an all-over yellow or all-over orange composition, I have to make it orange too. Why? If I make it any other color, it's going to be the most extraordinary thing in the picture. So I relegate it to fit in with what the rest of the picture is and make it a gray down, dull, orangey off-white. Much better than if I made it, well, green and white or blue and white. Really, you're quite safe working somewhat monochromatically. Mono meaning one, and chromo meaning color. So this is a composition of one color, but with vast variation. And the table, I have it black over there. I forgot my brown table. Didn't bring my brown table with me. But that's the nice thing about a painter. He doesn't have to have it exactly the way he wants it, because really it's whatever he wants he can have. That palette really is omnipotent. It can do anything you want it to do, but sometimes you don't know what you want. That's the hard part sometimes. That's why I married so many times. finally did it right. And so this is an orange, but very, very dark and quite yellowish. I'm concentrating on having your attention directed to the hue, tone, and the intensity of color. I don't paint pictures just to have you watch me paint pictures. I use pictures to try to teach you something that I think is important enough to know to be able to be a self-sufficient craftsman at painting. If you just emulate what I do, you're going to need me forever. Well, maybe that's kind of nice. But if I teach you what I know, you can fly on your own. How more homogeneous the background color is in relation to the colors I've already put down. Now that it is also a tone of orange. But I can really get it quite gray by mixing the orange into a lot of black and white. I'll put my terps closer by. Well, I'll finish that off camera because I want to get into something else. Yes, now we're acquainted with hue, tone, and intensity, the three personalities of color. We have to amalgamate that with the other three that we know about, and that is that everything is made of the three primary colors, red, yellow, and blue. Well, orange happens to be a mixture of yellow and red. What happens to blue? We have to use blue too. And so we use blue to diminish the orangeness of the color wherever we know that the orangeness can't show. So we take the basic mixture, let's say the basic mixture of the copper, orange, and put a little bit of blue, which is known as its complement, to paint in the shadows. Yes, that's the color of the shadow. How did I mix it? I made the orange darker with more orange, and then added the complementary blue to dull it. Sometimes you actually can see the appearance of the complementary color, but on copper I can't. Later on maybe I'll need to. And these shadows appear wherever the light is not showing off copper's magnificent orangedom. And it's quite dark, quite orangey, or quite bluish right in there. That's an underplane. See, it's under, and so it can't be light. The light can't turn and get down there. And under here, this is a little bit under too, and so it gets darker there. But how about those highlights? They look very orange, and they look very much brighter in intensity than the orange that I have. So it's very light and it's very bright, and so to mix the color of the highlight, I take white for its lightening, and its brightness, I use the orange and red of the brightest type I have. and I quickly mix it. Quickly mix it. Don't grind the living daylights out of it. Look how much brighter that looks than this. And pick up the paint on the end of your brush so that you can pop the highlights on. And did you think you were going to get away with watching me paint and not have to hear me say that the highlight hits on the apex of the concavities and convexities in line with the light? There's a convexity, and here's a no, that's a concavity. Here's a convexity. And I put the highlight on bigger than I see it, so I can mush it in. Yes. Everyone says, oh, you get everything so blended, and I don't. But they're afraid to push these colors together because they think they're going to ruin it. And I say to them, well, you don't have anything to lose. Why don't you try? Why don't you try to make a mess? So that would be the most wonderful mess you've ever made. You can't predict. You just have to try. Can't even predict what's going to happen to you tomorrow. How can you predict what's going to happen to the copper pot if you don't really give it a chance? Oh wow, look at how that starts to shine with a lighter, brighter orange. And how about the background? Yes, it's in the orange family, but it's rather drab looking. Doesn't seem to be doing anything. In fact, because I did paint it in a dull orange and it turned bluish. In relation to this bright orange, it looks that way, but I'd like to really make it look as though the light is striking that. So I'm going to use not orange, but an orange that goes very yellowish to make the light look as though it's hitting over here. And then I see that cast shadow. Well, on that background, the cast shadow would be also kind of blue. Kind of blue. Not because of the pot, but because it's an orange background. And that's kind of blue. That cast shadow just comes right to the tip of the onion, and that's called a kiss. So I'm going to move the cast shadow to where I think it's more advantageous. My picture, I can do anything with it what I want. As long as it records some of my better thoughts. And I like to make the background a little darker where the light comes from. After all, the background has to look as though it's air. That's the magic of a realistic painting. Not that it looks real. It looks airy. It looks dimensional. Because we can look at photographs that are realistic, but they don't look like the kind of real that paintings look. And now the onions. The highlight on onions are so white that they don't look orange, not like copper. And whenever you see something seemingly colorless on a color, you have to use the color's complement. And so I'm going to use not actually blue, but probably a violet. Just a cooler version, a cooler color than orange. So here's the highlight. And here's another highlight, big. Oh yeah, nice and big. And now cut it down with the color you see around it. It's like the investment business. I'm investing a lot of paint on that highlight so I can reap some dividends. Out of the investment by going the opposite way. Oh well, that was a clunker. But anyway. That's a nice little relief over there where that onion is broken away and we see some green coming through. And lighten the white. Rhythm of application, suggested by the texture. Read it as paint. And of course, we have to deal with the table too. It has shadows. It has one of the most important shadows that is offered to us by lighting, and that's the cast shadow. These shadows on the onion, by the way, are also in the blue family. Very dark right here. And blue into dark orange for the cast shadow to make their little bottoms sit down on the table. The cast shadow is also a nice tone value to pull a subject together. Make all the things look as though they're part of a theme, not just sitting there ignoring each other. Now, this is a thing that you must always take into consideration, and I see this mistake a lot. People paint a nice light background and then a very dark table. But most tables do have some kind of texture that allows them to shine. And so the table has to be influenced by the background color because it reflects it. Very shiny, you would end up actually seeing a repeat of the object, meaning this, and then that would be reflecting in it. But I can't see putting these earthy subject matters on. I blobbed some paint down there. Now I just got to get rid of it. I like it lighter down there. How much better that table looks in relation to the subject now that it is done with the background's influence in mind. Whenever you set up a still life, make sure you have the right tone background against the subject so that you can see its influence. So we've learned all about, I got to put a handle on this, just hue, tone, and intensity. Those very three important properties of color. Another three in painting. Wow, I've got to get a cast shadow from this on the background and make it go all the way over to here. You think I'm finished with the threes? The three primary colors, the three properties of color, an approach 1, 2, 3. There's another three in painting. You only have three choices to make: people, places, or things. Isn't it amazing with that limitation that we come up with so many different types of paintings? So that's what I'm going to show you next time. Or well, maybe I will teach you how to make soup.
Hello, I'm Helen Van Wyk, and welcome to my studio.